Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the first Environment and Climate Change Committee. Welcome to you all. Could I ask everyone to note that the fire safety instruction that's on the hearing the alarm, there are no planned fire drills, so if the alarm goes off, please leave the building in an orderly fashion through the nearest fire exit. Please use the fire exit through the main doors of the hall or the fire exit to the storeroom at my left. The fire assembly point is the island in front of the main entrance to the building. Please do not delay your evacuation to collect any belongings. Please do not return to the building until given permission to do so by council staff. Please be reminded to switch off your mobile phone and turn any other electronic devices being used to silent. Please note that the meeting will be live streamed where the proceedings are capable of repeated viewing. Please ensure your microphone is switched on when speaking and you speak clearly into the microphone. If you are seated in the public area, which we have none, it is likely that your image will be captured. Members, that if for any reason you are not present for the whole of the debate on an item, you will not be allowed to vote on that item. May I remind members to declare any interest and the nature of the interest at the beginning of the agenda item, and that on declaring pecuniary interest, you are required to leave the room when that item of business is considered. Item 1, apologies for absence and substitute members. We have Councillor Goodin, Councillor Williams and Councillor Capon. Apologies. Item 2.
We have Nick Booth is subbing for Capon, but he'll be slightly late.
Councillor Booth will be subbing for Councillor Capon when he arrives later. Non-members attending, there are none. Minutes of the meeting held on the 31st of January 2024. Are the minutes agreed? Thank you. Thank you. Are there any declaration of interest? There are none. Question 5, public question on notice. There are none. Before we take note of these appointments, outside bodies appointments, I'd like to propose that the Councillor Michael Hoy.
Sorry, Councillor. Sorry,
I've got the wrong side. Sorry.
Just hand it over to me.
I beg your pardon. I'd like to open the meeting by asking Matt if there is anything he wishes to highlight within the report.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, members. I'll be brief with just a few points, and members might have heard similar points at other committees already. So firstly, there have been appointments made to outside bodies at a couple of policy committees already this municipal year. Members will remember that Council delegated that decision to committees back in May when it met. The report does propose 2 recommendations, which we actually will be looking to amend in this meeting with the committee's agreement, which the Chair and I will explain shortly. One of them that will remain, though, is a delegation to the monitoring officer to authorise appointments to in-year vacancies. Just to be very clear on that, that doesn't authorise the monitoring officer to decide that he does or doesn't like a particular member, to remove them from a committee, or to pick and choose whom he might want to sit on an outside body. It's purely to give effect to the decisions of the political groups on the council. So Councillor Smith from Group X can no longer serve on the outside body. They say we'd like Councillor Jones to take his space. The monitoring officer would then authorise that. So that's what that delegation is for. The appointments we have been consulted on with the political groups. There isn't, however, a formula applied to appointments to committees, so they're not, for example, politically proportionate. So it's for this committee to decide if the members put forward are the members that it wants to appoint. And in the last few days, officers, we've discussed with the chairman the purpose of making appointments to the Bradwell be Community Forum, excuse me, and the Bradwell Local Community Liaison Council. The meetings of those bodies seem to be infrequent, and we're looking into whether the appointments are made with an eye to the environmental impact of the site or the jobs and skills that the site could bring. Officers are therefore proposing, through the chairman, that appointments are not made to those two bodies at this time, but that a review of these outside bodies, including their appointing committee, is undertaken, and that the outcome of that review be reported back to the appropriate committee in due course. Just to be clear, we are still looking to make appointments to all of the other outside bodies that are mentioned. I'm happy, before members vote at the end of this item, to read very clearly what your recommendations before you are. But at this point, Chairman, I'll hand back to you, and of course, very happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Matt. We are fortunate that we do not have any oversubscribed outside bodies, so the voting on these appointments should be fairly simple. We do have some amendments to the report to consider, which I will ask Mr. Stickley to confirm before we come to the vote. Firstly, I would like to propose that we do not appoint to the Bradwell outside bodies this evening for the reason Mr. Stickley has just explained. Is that agreeable to the committee? Thank you. Before we formally take a vote on these appointments, I'd also like to propose that Councillor Michael Hoy is appointed to one of the spaces on the Crouch Valley Coastal Community. Subject to him agreeing to this outside of this meeting, I understand that Councillor Hoy is keen to be appointed to this body, and I think his appointment would add value to that body. But as he has been unwell, we are unable to confirm this before this meeting. Can I ask the members that this is agreeable? Thank you. In which case, I should ask the clerk to confirm exactly what we are voting on before asking members for their votes.
What I'll do is I'll read this now.
Yeah.
What I should have done, though, is put in for you to ask if they have any questions.
Oh,
So if
right.
I read that, you say, does anybody have any questions before we vote?
Want me to read this?
Yeah, but before that, or actually, let's do it now. I'll tell you what.
Do
just
it now.
Say, does anyone have any questions before we come?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Do we have any questions for Mr. Stickley before we vote on this? Yes, Councillor. Sorry, Councillor Belton.
Just one question. I don't know much about a lot of these committees, having never sat on them, and I know there was a piece of work being done last year, but does it hold the council at any detriment if we're not filling up these spaces? So, for example, the Crouch Valley Coastal Community, I would support Councillor Hoy joining, but are we left in a disadvantage by not having both spaces filled? This isn't me putting my name forward, it's just me understanding the capacity of the committee, the committee.
The officer to answer that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. It would depend on the outside body, to be honest. There would be some outside bodies that the council and all members think add huge value for members being appointed to, and some that, with respect, probably there's not a lot you're getting from it, not a lot they're getting from it, perhaps. What we do intend to do is, ahead of the next municipal year, we'll be doing a full review of appointments to outside bodies this year. So just to give context as to what that means, we've reviewed appointments to the outside bodies that are being appointed to now through pretty light touch, speaking to the outside bodies. Do you still want someone? Speaking to the members. Have you been going to meetings? Has it seemed to be useful? And the ones that we're getting yeses from have come forward. What we haven't done for some time is looked at whether the appointments to the outside bodies make sense for you as members, whether they align with the strategic objectives of the organisation. So it's a bit of a non-answer to say it depends on the outside body. What I would say is that the delegation that the committee is asked to agree does allow for appointments in year. So things like the Bradwell outside bodies, if we look at those members and officers and everyone still feels that there is value to have there, then we can make an in-year appointment in the next few months, and members of this council will still be going to the outside body meetings and contributing to it.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh, I'm terribly sorry, Councillor Sharp.
No problem. May I ask, how frequently do the representatives to these bodies report to this committee?
Matt, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Simple answer is they haven't been. This is a new committee, of course. Since I joined and as part of the sort of lighter review I talked about a little earlier, it's been very clear that reporting to the council has been infrequent and it's been unbalanced. So some members are very diligent in going to an outside body, emailing their thoughts to all members or members that they think would benefit from that, the relevant executive member. Some members have been going along and haven't been doing that. And it's not to say that they've been doing something wrong. We appreciate that members give up their time to sit on these along with lots of other commitments. What we would like to do this year as part of that review that we talked about, the fuller review, is to put in place, without over-engineering it, but some mechanism for members to report back from the outside bodies to the wider council, and that will probably initially be through the committees. So, and I will invite Marcus in on this with the chairman's agreement, if that's okay. But one of the things we're keen to do is that in 6 months' time, it may be that Councillor Sharp has been on an outside body, has been to a couple of meetings, comes back to this committee, and there's a space on the agenda for you to share what your thoughts are. And here are the things the outside body's been doing, and this is what we think is working well and what isn't working quite so well. In future, that might look slightly different, but we think that's probably a healthy starting point. And through you, Chairman, I'd be happy to invite the Director of Environment to comment as well.
Yes, please do. Marcus?
Thank you. I think so. There's probably an opportunity because we've moved from the executive to a committee system, perhaps to have what we call a chairs update. So perhaps, which is, you wouldn't see for the first committee, but what you'll probably see for the future committees is an item to note, a chairs update, and whether they will pick up various pieces of business that perhaps aren't of merit for a report, but are of interest. So again, we have a lot of these sort of outside bodies, and there may be meetings. What we can do is we can put that within the chairs update, say these meetings occurred, and an appendix any other reports, or at least refer to where those kind of minutes can be found of those outside bodies. I think it's really the best way forward, and then you can sort of scrutinise those as a committee then. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Cross.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a suggestion really that the outside body meetings are usually minuted. Would it be good practice going forward to have a copy of those minutes distributed to all councillors?
Matt?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. It's a helpful suggestion, and we can certainly look at doing that. Yes, and we'll also want to speak to members about other ways that we can share what's going on. Chair's report being just one example. So, short answer is yes, we can look at that.
In relation to this outside bodies, of which I am on 2 of those outside bodies, the Essex Waste and the Essex Flood, you will get a report from me from these 2 bodies that meet. And we have a meeting in September for waste. So I should be going to that and give you a report on that later. Thank you. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. I spoke with Councillor Hoy the other day, and he indicated that he wanted to be a member of the Crouch Harbour Authority. I've just received a WhatsApp message from him saying, yes, please.
We will notify him that he's got the job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just hand this over to the officer, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I think I've got the, if I put forward the amended recommendations to the committee, and they should hopefully cover the point about Councillor Hoy, but just before I do, can I just ask if it was the Crouch Harbour Authority or the Crouch Valley Coastal Community?
Yeah, sorry, through you, Chair. The Crouch Valley Coastal Community.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you. So I just wanted to check on that one. Excellent.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chairman. In which case, then, if I read the recommendations to the committee, there's 2 recommendations, one of which is very conditional, so just bear with me. Recommendation 1, to agree the appointments to the outside bodies as set out at Appendix A, with the addition of Councillor Michael Hoy to the Crouch Valley Coastal Community, subject to him accepting, which I'll have to get in writing, and with the exception of appointments to the Bradwell B Community Forum and the Bradwell Local Community Liaison Council. If I put that one first, Chairman, if that's all right, it's probably easier to vote on these one by one, if that's okay.
Yes, thank you. Is that agreed by members? Agreed.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. And then the second recommendation is to delegate authority to the monitoring officer to authorise the in-year appointments of nominated representatives which arise as a result of an in-year vacancy.
Is that agreed by members? Item 7, Flood Working Group. This report sets out the appointment of representatives to the Flood Working Group for this administrative year. The report begins on page 7.1. 7.1 point. Mr. Houghton, do you have anything to add to the report?
No, nothing to add. I'm happy to take questions, although I will defer to Mr. Stickley on perhaps on the recommendations. I think there's a suggested amendment to recommendation 2. Thank you.
Yes, through you, Chairman, thank you. Not to preempt members' debate, but when members do come to vote, that's not the one I want. When members do come to vote on the recommendations, recommendation 2, it says to delegate authority to the chair of this committee. It should actually read to delegate authority to the monitoring officer in consultation with the chair of this committee, and that's standard in a committee system that delegations are to officers rather than to members. So apologies for that, but that's the one clarification on recommendation 2. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Matt. So I move that the recommendation set out on page 7.1 of the report. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Wilson. Do I have any questions on the report? None? None, thank you. Can we now have a show of hands on the recommendations to the recommendations on page 7.1? Fully unanimous, that one. Thank you. Item 8, Cemetery and Memorial Policy Regulations. The report provides an update version of the RDC Cemetery and Memorial Policy Recommendations. Unfortunately, Adam Aldridge isn't here to add anything to the report, so I'm going to ask Marcus Houghton if he would like to say anything, and then invite questions from the committee members.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. I don't have too much more to add. I think just to sort of summarise that many of these changes, tweaks to the policy are just a reflection of the practical situation of the day-to-day running of the cemetery. So in many ways, the policy is catching up with what is already the practice of the cemetery. So, but we just want to ensure that we have a situation where everything is consistent across practice and policy. But I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Councillor Belton.
Thank you. Just one question in relation to recommendation 3, where it says, where it relates to making minor changes in consultation between yourself, Marcus, and the chairman. Just what would a minor change be? Just because it could be ambiguous.
Mr. Hodden.
So for clarity, it is just from experience, no matter how many times you look at a document, there will always be a few typos. It's in, at the moment, very standard A4, so it will go into a policy document, which is a slightly different format. So it's really just belt and braces. So the wording will stay the same, but what I didn't want is someone saying that isn't the same policy, but it'll just be in a corporate format. and it gives me one more chance if there's any apps. I mean, unfortunately, I have read through this, but I think that the classic thing is when you have that not missing from a sentence. We've all read it as it means do not, but you know, it's them sort of examples. So as long as it's clear, it's just to pick up any typos, frankly.
Councillor Sharp, do you have a question?
Yeah, I do, thank you. I don't know whether there are any restrictions on the religion of people being buried in the cemetery, but I've read through the regulations and there's no mention of Muslim burials. And my understanding of the Islamic faith is that they don't permit cremations and they certainly don't permit burials to more than one per plot. So I'm just wondering, is there a need to provide a further addendum to these regulations dealing with Muslim burials?
Mr. Houghton?
So, I mean, certainly that's something I'm happy to bring back to the committee at a later date to sort of onto the multi-faith aspect. But there is, I was thinking with Jewish burials as well, we have to sort of reflect their needs as well in terms of times and speed of burial. So the policy is a standard use of the policy. I do take your point, and that's something we're happy to bring back to the committee if they wish to see that in the near future.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know whether this helps Councillor Sharp, but religious grounds, there are areas of the burial sites and our memorial sites for different religions, Catholic as anybody else. So yes, thank you for Mr. Houghton to bring that back onto our notice. Thank you very much. Thank you, Councillor Sharp. Councillor Cross.
Thank you, Chair. 1.3, to remove the right to reserve a burial plot. In the case of a family area, and my family have a region of Hall Road Lawn Cemetery, it would be perhaps a future wish to be buried in the same general area. So if you can't reserve a plot, how is the plot selected? Is it a random plottery?
Mr. Houghton, thank you.
It is an area of contention, but from experience, unfortunately, we've found that attempting to reserve plots can also cause a great deal of upset if it can't be honoured. And so from experience, unfortunately, where we've had reserved graves that may have been there for some time, and you have burials that are surrounding that plot, that at times, from experience, we found that it can be quite hard to then actually excavate sensitively for those existing graves successfully. And so what we've had in previously in the past, and it unfortunately happened more than once now, where we've had to say we just cannot honour that reserved plot, and we're going to have to allocate you another plot. And I think you'll find most, as Mr. Aldridge has hinted here, most have moved away from this practice for that reason, and that it's very hard to be certain that and the upset that causes is probably some of the worst I've experienced when you have to sort of deal with that situation where there's an expectation that they will be buried there, and next to perhaps other family members then say that it cannot be done is traumatic for everyone involved. And I think what we'd rather say is that we just can't guarantee that. You know, at this stage, it's better to say that you'll be given an allocated plot. Our recommendation in those situations that perhaps people can consider cremations, but burials are quite hard to manage. It's just the nature of the cemetery that the soils aren't naturally the best in that cemetery area, unfortunately.
Yeah, I'd like to come back on that, if I may, Marcus. The plots are purchased in advance, and obviously you don't know when you're going to die, so that's why they remain vacated for some period of time. But it's obviously a source of advance income for the council when somebody purchases a predetermined plot. The plots are numbered. I don't really see it being an issue. Have you had any objections from people that wanted to reserve a particular plot in a particular area?
So obviously we've not brought the policy in. I mean, certainly you can still reserve a a plot, but we can't guarantee that it will be a specific location in the future. And I think there has been an expectation in the past, but at times it can be quite hard to guarantee that. Unfortunately, it's. I think perhaps with the new parts of the cemetery, we may have better success, but certainly in the older parts of the cemetery, measuring them out with a set square doesn't occur. So you may just find you haven't quite got the room that you think you've got for a plot once you've allocated all around it. I mean, it's not as scientific as it ought to be. So I think that's why we're wishing to move away from that sort of allocation.
Okay, presumably existing plots that have been purchased will be honoured. Right, yeah.
Thank you. Any more questions? Yes, Councillor Constable.
Thank you. They talk about headstones and pre-installed beams. Is this something new? It's not something I've heard of before. Is this a new system? And how do you install a beam unless you've dug the grave or whatever? Because if you've got the beam, can the beam then move like the headstone can? Perhaps you could just explain this to us, please.
So the beams are installed in advance. So you'll install a beam that will perhaps cover 10 plots on either side. So the advantage is that there's it's a large concrete plinth basically that runs the length of the cemetery plots. And the advantage is that one, you can put the headstones on almost immediately because there's the stability there, and it does create a straight and an even approach to the cemetery in the longer term as well. It's far easier to mark out. So there's a bit of permanency to it. I mean, you'll see that quite commonly in a lot of the London cemeteries. I mean, I don't know if you. I mean, the one that springs to mind is the one by Gallows Corner. If you go up in that way, there's a bit sandy, but there's a very well presented cemetery there where all the headstones are perfectly straight and even, and that's achieved through having these headstones. And many of the war memorials. Where you have the large war memorial sort of heads will have the same sort of system. So you do get a neater cemetery in the longer term, but also without the I guess the grievance of headstones perhaps shifting and subsiding over time. So I think for the families as well, it gives them a bit of certainty that what you're going back to is what you'll visit year after year.
Thank you. That's quite informative.
Perhaps I can elaborate on that for you. The beam, if you go into Rayleigh Cemetery on the Hockley Road, you'll find that most of the plots are tipping one way or the other because of no support to the headstones. In Hall Road Cemetery, there is a beam very similar to a concrete lintel, and it's something like 20 metres long. It's a poured concrete and it stabilises the headstone to go on that concrete beam. It really is a safe and durable place to put the headstone. It will not sink in the mud or any clay or anything like that. It's got reinforcement to it, so I've been told. And every one is centred. There's a marker on the beam and it's centred for the headstone to go on there, which gives a little bit of room either side to the edges of the headstones, so that the next one is approximately 18 inches to 2 foot from the centre. So everyone gets the same amount of room, and it's more of a reliable way of doing things than it is just to put a headstone on the soil and leave it, and somebody's got to do something if it tipples over or somebody gets injured with them, because they are quite heavy. So that is the idea of the beam. Thank you. Okay. Anybody else want any questions on that? No? Thank you. I will move the recommendation set out on page 8.1 of the report. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Constable, thank you. We will now vote on the recommendations on page 8.1 of the report. A show of hands, please, for unanimous. Thank you. The motion is carried. Item 9, Sustainability and Strategy Progress Report. This report sets out the progress made against the Council's sustainability strategy and the next steps in the Council's response to the climate emergency in achieving carbon net zero emissions Council activities by 2030. As we haven't got Mr. Musk to add anything to the report, could I have any questions from the committee members? Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. On page 9.11 of the report, that we've got one red item there, which is to engage with local adult education and social housing partners to develop low carbon apprenticeship opportunities by April 2025. And it's got no progress to report, but do we know if the work has started at all?
Matt, would you like to take this, or Mr. Houghton? Thank you.
I think some tentative conversations have been had, so you could say it started, hence why we've been honest, but and sort of coded it red. I think some of the issues, of course, is the apprenticeship scheme keeps changing. So I think so. You know, you had. I think even when the time it's been written there, understanding how the apprenticeship scheme is working has changed again. But certainly, we want to still see if there's something we can do. It's a wider aspiration. It doesn't mean that within the council. This means about trying to set up apprenticeships for green skills within the district. So it's a bit more of a challenging piece of work to do. I think, again, hopefully that's something we can pick up this year.
Thank you, Mr. Houghton. This item is for information. Oh, I beg your pardon. Sorry, Councillor Belton.
That's okay. I was just going to come back on, following on from Councillor Wilson's point regarding the first item, which is marked as green, the Tower Park homes being completed, which is great if they're all done, because challenging work. And next steps, working with Essex County Council on other opportunities. Has anything else been done other than a Facebook advert? Because it's my concern is when things go green, and this is just an example of one, but when things go green, we kind of forget about them because they're done. But that's an ongoing piece of work that doesn't really end. And I just wondered, has anything else happened? And this may be something that Henry wants to come back on at a later date, which is absolutely fine. But and that relates to anything green, because some of them aren't job and knock items, they're more ongoing items. So what happens when an item is green? Do we keep reviewing it, or do we just sort of pat on the back and walk away?
Thank you.
And I take your point fully. So I mean, the report is a snapshot in time. So you're absolutely so perhaps if we took this in 6 months' time, that would be amber again if no progress being made. I mean, on that one, there are other aspects coming forward as well. But again, I think we'll try and again with the chairs update. It could be a very long chairs update if we're not careful, but we will try and update things quarterly of interest to the committee generally within that update. So there should be a piece that comes back on that regarding. I think we can do some work, sort of promotional work within Rayleigh, within the Mill Hall. I think there's a sort of workshop coming up, but I'd have to get some more detail that's hot off the press. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Sharp.
Thank you, Chair. It seems to me that overall good progress is being made, so I think I would like to congratulate the council for that effort. But I do note that on paragraph 310 on page 9.4, the scorecard is showing an assessment of 15%, but as against an average district borough scorecard of 29%. So would you like to expand on the fact that we do seem to be behind the 8 ball as compared to the other boroughs?
Thank you. So in many ways, as an authority, I think we did come quite late to the table in terms of addressing this as an issue. And hence the score is reflective of that. There are also other. The scoring is I could almost present a paper if you wish. Come back on that alone. I think maybe a thing to do. But I think the easiest way would be to send around something to the committee members, actually giving you the breakdown of the score, so we can give you a link to see that. and you can see how that score was arrived at, you'll see that there are certain aspects that we will just naturally score low at, just because of where we are in our local plan cycle, for example. So if you've just currently reviewed your local plan and it reflects local, national policy, then of course you're going to score more highly. But if you're towards the end of your local plan, which is where we are, and we're under review, then your policies are 10 years out of date and out of kilter with what is national policy in terms of sort of climate, addressing climate sort of emergency issues. So you'll find there are just, I wouldn't be too concerned at this stage, because I think we're doing very well in terms of achieving carbon net zero, but there are wider aspects I think we pick up on. But certainly that's, so I think the easy thing to do is perhaps send that round to the committee members, the scorecard. If there's any specific questions that come out of that, perhaps I'll discuss with the chair, and maybe a paper we bring back for discussion at a later date.
So would you expect that at the time of the next report, that gap might be narrowing?
Yes, the reason I'm slightly cautious is the scorecard questions actually change with time. So if the scorecard questions were to stay the same, then yes, I think you'd see our score improve. But what happens is they seem to set a different bar each time, and you may find that we are pleasantly surprised. But I would like to think the answer is yes, but I wouldn't want to say be too overconfident at this stage.
Councillor Belton.
Thank you, Chair, for letting me come back. Just on that point, it's my belief regarding this percentage and that particular set of scoring, it's quite contentious because it's just one measure. It's how one group determine the score, and you could go to another body essentially and they score councils in a different way. It's not a black and white science, which I think is why you do get some disparages. And also because the question's changing and the timing of councils, it's not a fair reflection, which is why my personal view on this as a councillor was that it wasn't something that was very important to channel, because it is just a snapshot and not necessarily accurate compared against other measuring tools, and that our carbon emission is the one that we should be concentrating on, because that is very scientific and matter of fact. But that's a point of view as opposed to anything else.
Thank you, Councillor Belton. Councillor Cross.
Thank you, Chair. Page 9.6, there's a lot of discussion about green hydrogen, and on 4.3, the conclusion is that we'll continue to monitor it. But it seems to be that all of the attention regarding hydrogen is based around fuel cell powered vehicles, which are electric vehicles that happen to be fueled by hydrogen to provide power from the fuel cell. They're then conventional electric vehicles. I would like to see some research done on hydrogen-based internal combustion engines. JCB have a working excavator vehicle that has a hydrogen-based internal combustion engine. We don't seem to be doing any research on this. Further to that, there's also the possibility of using ammonia to provide an energy source. It does require some extra tailpipe filtering because some raw ammonia gets emitted, which is a horrible smell, as you can imagine. But ammonia-powered vehicles, again, they're internal combustion engines, not electric vehicles, but the CO2 emissions are very low. I think the waste at the tailpipe is just water vapor, basically. Well, I'm no expert on that, but I'd like to see some research done for going towards 2030 on what we're doing regarding ammonia-powered vehicles. Toyota have a passenger vehicle now with a ammonia-fueled internal combustion engine. I guess I don't want us to be blinkered in thinking that electric vehicles are the only way to go to achieve net carbon zero. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cross. Mr. Houghton, sorry. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So I think Councillor Cross, we've obviously discussed this previously, and so I do take the point. I think there is I think that we are very much, I guess, governed by national policy. As a local authority, in reality, our ability to shape the national sort of scene or model, if you like, for how we're going to go forward and capture different fuels methods is very limited. So in many ways, what we do is we do look to see what policy is coming forward, and I guess in many ways you'd expect that to be shaped by experts in government that do this. I mean, so although I could go away and do some research, I think it's probably rather more limited in my understanding and capability than probably what's already done out there that is shaping policy. So I find it very interesting, particularly ammonia and even the hydrogen fuel I find fascinating. But in reality, how I shape our decisions or how recommendations to this council is very much on what is set out by government in terms of realistically what they think it's going to achieve in the near term rather than the longer term. But I do take your point. Thank you.
I understand that, Marcus. Thank you. There is an authority quoted somewhere in the report that's already gone over to using hydrogen fuel cell electric vehicles in their refuse collection vehicle fleet. I'd like to see going forward Rochford Council being up there pioneering maybe ammonia-powered vehicles, RCVs. But I accept that you've got to follow the national thinking on the subject. But I think we can be pioneering as well. The disadvantage, by the way, with hydrogen fuel cell vehicles or internal combustion engines is the fact that you've got to carry hydrogen in a pressurized environment, and that's quite costly. You've also got to store the stuff or have a ready available source of hopefully green hydrogen. Ammonia doesn't carry that same problem. It's relatively easy to have in a tank, I believe, in liquid form. But anyway, take your point, and I think it's worth doing some investigation on it anyway. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cross. I did note that in 4.3 on page 9.6, we have written that this will continue to be reviewed annually. So at this moment in time, that's what we are doing, is reviewing the situation as to if it's in the benefit of the council. Thank you. Item 10, a purchase of waste and street cleansing vehicles. This report sets out the vehicles that require purchasing to ensure continuity of delivery of the waste and street cleansing service undertaken by Rochford North. Mr. Houghton, do you have anything to add to this report?
Thank you, Chair. I mean, just one quick note in that it's imperative that we do move forward and purchase these vehicles at some pace. I think you'll see the report sets that out. So there's two aspects. One is the need for the vehicles. I think in discussion with members, I understand obviously that there's some views on whether electric vehicles should be purchased. So I have provided an Appendix 2, which is almost identical to Appendix 1, but basically sets out the vehicles as diesel rather than electric. So if members were not minded not to go with electric, then at least I do provide an option on the evening, as I would prefer a decision one way or the other. But I would add those that in terms of the recommendation is for electric vehicles where we can afford them, just because we feel that that's the way forward and reflection of the fact that we declared a climate emergency as an authority. And so where we can, we think we ought to be leading the way and setting example. Thank you. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Houghton? Councillor Cross.
Thank you, Chair. I have here Rochford District Matters, Spring 2023, and it says that last year Norse took over the refuse collection vehicles and they had a nice new fleet provided for them, 2022. So why are we now saying that this is so urgent to replace the fleet?
So most of the fleet will replace them, but not all the fleet. So I can't comment on the spin perhaps of the Rochford District Matters at the time, but I mean certainly the report was set out very clearly that 10 vehicles to be bought, 26-ton vehicles, and one was to be bought, one 18-ton vehicle. And this is at council at the time, which left a remainder of 2 26-ton vehicles and the street cleansing fleet. And so at the time, council approved purchase of the waste collection fleet, if you like, but the street cleansing and the remaining waste collection fleet had still to be finalised, and that's where we are now.
Okay, so you're not intending to replace any of the
Absolutely not, no.
waste collection vehicles? Thank you.
Councillor Belton.
Thank you. Right, just a few questions. So regarding the proposed electric vehicles, operationally, are they practical?
Yes.
Okay, great. Second question, the bulk of the cost is for the green waste vehicles. Now, I might be jumping the gun here, but should a change in how green waste is managed come in, which we're hearing through the grapevines it's likely to happen at some point, as it has elsewhere, will that change the amount of green waste vehicles we need? If a third of the districts say they don't want green waste anymore, are we then left with a surplus vehicle? Or is that highly unlikely based on other councils?
I feel like a politician now, so it's slightly hypothetical. So we work with what I have in front of me, and that is we are not planning at this stage to make any changes to the Garden Waste Collection Service, hence why we are purchasing these extra vehicles. Because they were held in abeyance, I think, while we talked about having a review. But at this stage, there is no change planned to the garden waste, so hence why we're ordering them. Thank you.
And just my final point, if I may, Chairman. So on that, because it ties in, if we didn't end up needing them all, are they resellable? And that leads on to the last part of my question, was with these vehicles that we're replacing, will we be looking to sell them? Will we be getting a return on any of these? Because second-hand vehicles, whilst they might not be practical for the amount of work that they do for Rochford, there's still good value in them. So,
I mean, obviously we will achieve what value we can from those, but I'm very reluctant to put a figure on that until they're actually, I mean, just unfortunately the costs of removing the oils and fluids, even from an old vehicle, can sometimes outweigh the cost of the scrap, so it's hard to predict. Okay, so just for clarity, we'll always be looking to get the best possible return if there is one, and not just gifting them or scrapping them or another. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Constable.
The £1 million there, you're talking about the purchase of the remaining vehicle fleet. That's not just refuse vehicles, is it? Is that all the cage vehicles and everything else, or is it just refuse vehicles? What age are the ones that are going, and how many?
So I think if you're looking at Appendix 1, you'll see the details there. So I think without looking too quick, I think they're around 10 to 9 years old now, the vehicles. And so there's two. I mean, and so the condition that they've had reasonably hard lives. Certainly the refuse collection vehicles, I can hand on heart say that they're not being used. We're actually having to rent vehicles now, so they're off the road. With the cage-sized vehicles, you could possibly look to squeeze a little bit more life out if you wish to. I think the other thing the report alludes to is that practices have changed. So what you really want is a side-loading cage rather than a back-loading cage, because what you're inviting is them to work off the road rather than off the pavement.
Councillor.
Yeah, can I come back on that? I'm concerned on the electric vehicles you're proposing to buy with the tipper lorries, that the cost of them is a lot more than what the diesel vehicles would be, especially if we went over to a green diesel. That would obviously achieve a saving on our carbon emissions. But the biggest concern I have is their range. You're looking at a fair-sized vehicle there, 3.5 ton tipper. I had a little look on Ford's website, and for a 50 kilowatt vehicle, you're going to get 120 miles. Is that enough for what we need it to be? Because that's a best case scenario. We've got a vehicle out in the middle of the winter, and they've got the heaters on, they've got the lights on, they've got the windscreen wipers on. Are they going to run out of power halfway through the day and have to come back to be recharged? That's my biggest concern. And could we achieve the same carbon savings by going over to green diesel on these vehicles?
The two questions. One, is the range sufficient? The answer is yes. I mean, we don't, most of the rounds are actually quite limited. So 50 miles a day is probably adequate in terms of what they'll cover. So the range is we believe, acceptable. In terms of the HVO question, you will almost achieve the same sort of reductions. It's about 90% reduction using HVO fuel above the green diesel rather than going to electric. The consideration you've got to give is one that, again, if I point to government policy, that what they would say is the route to carbon decarbonising the fleet is still the electric route rather than HVO. I think HVO is commendable as a stopgap. So if you have an existing diesel fleet and you wish to achieve a carbon reduction quickly, I think it's worth considering. But my recommendation for a new fleet that where you can afford to do so, it would be to go electric. The consideration with the HVO is there would be a budgetary pressure and it could be reversed as well by in terms of time. So once you've gone to electric, it's an electric vehicle. I could buy HVO today, but I could buy diesel again tomorrow. And I think that would be the concern. So I commend HVO for an existing fleet, but I would recommend electric as much as to show leadership as a council in terms of we've declared a climate emergency, and part of that is about demonstrating our own walking the walk, if you wish.
Supplementary on that, of course, most electric vehicles now seem to have a 4-year lifespan, because after that the batteries are pretty shot. Would you be looking at then rebatterying these vehicles or getting rid of them? Because after 4 years, if you're looking at 20,000 or more to put new batteries in them, they're worthless. There's a lot of electric cars on the market now that are coming up to 4 years old that they're just worthless because of the battery technology, and people don't want to buy them. So the question there is buying against leasing, because you haven't got the loss. Has that been looked at all? And I'll let you go on to that before.
So for North, I mean, obviously we take their view on that. So that's they're going to purchase those and have to maintain those for the length of the contracts. They are improving all the time, electric vehicles. And I take your point, the earlier generations do struggle. The sort of more modern electric vehicles are lasting longer, and that's something they've addressed. You're right, it certainly is. It was a problem in the earlier models in terms of battery life, but they are beginning to improve. So my understanding is that they're quite comfortable to take these on.
Also, what's the availability of the diesel tippers? Again, looking on Ford's website, they seem to be very, very limited availability, which is obviously going to put the cost of them up at this stage.
It would seem that all vehicles are limited, rather frustratingly. So that's not trying to be evasive about it, but I mean it is equally frustrating to even order a fleet of diesel 3.5 ton tippers that they are of an equivalent waiting list. So a year's waiting list isn't unusual for vehicles, electric or diesel, at this time.
Councillor.
Thank you. Just coming back on some of the points that I've heard. I mean, for me, the important thing here is agreeing to purchase vehicles, whether they're from Appendix A or Appendix B. Personally, I could take or leave, because electric vehicles are good on paper and they tick a box from a climate perspective, but then there's the whole debate about embodied carbon, and as Councillor Constable has stated, how long they're going to last, and batteries and so on and so forth. But what I do take from this report is that we need to purchase new vehicles. As someone who owns a large fleet, I know how difficult it is when they are off the road, and reading that there's 4 off the road, you're having to rely on lease companies. When one breaks down, that has a direct impact on our residents. I think we can probably all agree that bins not being emptied, litter are huge complaints that we get from residents. So it's important that we continue to have a reliable fleet of vehicles that cover all of those types of things. So I think, as Marcus has pointed out, with a 1-year waiting list and the fact that we've got an ageing fleet, it is important, and it's probably why, and I don't recall exactly why, but back in 2022 and then promoted in 2023, thank you Andy Cross, Councillor Andy Cross for reminding me, is why we purchased vehicles back then for the exact same reason, to make sure that Rochford's got a reliable fleet and that we can deliver an important service for the residents. So I found the debate interesting about electric versus diesel, but ultimately purchasing the vehicles is the priority here. We just need to decide which ones we want to recommend to the council, but an ageing fleet is one that will let our residents down. So in my opinion, it's going to be money well spent one way or the other.
Thank you, Councillor Belton. Anybody, Councillor Cross, you have a question?
Thank you, Chairman. I don't know how it's got to this stage where all of a sudden we need to replace these vehicles. We had years and years of neglect by previous administrations in not replacing these vehicles. Why is it coming to a head now? And we're choosing, or you want us to choose, the most expensive options by replacing all these vehicles with electric versions. You know, I'm all for electric vehicles, but as Councillor Constable said, you know, we would need to be looking at replacing batteries. We've got to install infrastructure to be charging them. That's an additional cost, which hasn't been mentioned. And I would prefer, well, to see a cost comparison here with equivalent diesel vehicles, which could be run either on HVO or a percentage of HVO in the initial stages. It can be mixed from 10% to 100%, whatever you choose. So we don't have to go totally HVO from day one. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Squires Coleman.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just wondering, thank you, Nick. I'm wondering, was any of this cost already put in the budget, agreed to in the budget?
Thank you. So that's to clarify that. So in many ways, yes, this is within budget. So that's why it's been set out that way. So perhaps if it's been beyond budget, I wouldn't be recommending the electric vehicles at all. You know, but I've said it's within the budget that was set aside. So what I'm saying is it can be delivered within the budgets that were given for vehicles purchases for the waste and street cleansing purchases. So that's hence why it's probably a little bit less contentious in my view to say, well, look, I'll put that forward to you. I take your point, Councillor Cross, as well. But I suppose as an officer, I thought it'd be wrong for me not to give you the electric vehicle option. I mean, Appendix 2 is the identical vehicles, but all diesel. So you'll find there's a total cost, I think, of about 996, if my memory serves me correct, at the bottom of that. So there is an equivalent appendice of all diesel. So if members are minded to say that we really don't want to take electric vehicles, that's for you to decide as an administration. That's as an officer for me to respect. I've just put a recommendation forward, but if it's changed, I will happily accept that, and of course then and deliver whatever I have to do. Thank you.
Councillor Booth.
Yeah, can I just seek clarification? Was also recommendation 3 of the possibility of hiring at just over £100,000. Was that agreed in the budget at full council in February as well?
So there is a waste and street cleansing contract reserve put aside for, if you like, contingency situations, and this is one of these situations. So there is hence why, to clarify, if there wasn't a budget, you'll see in the next report, it'd be recommending to council, because as a committee we don't have any authority to approve anything beyond budget. So everything I put here, I ask for a committee to approve, is within the budget set out by the council.
Thank you for the clarification. So do we roughly know how much is left in that reserve that the 100,000 is coming out of?
I would have to come back and clarify that. It has moved since I last spoke, but there is more than enough to cover that. Thank you.
That would provide reassurance. Thank you.
Can I just say to Councillor Booth that last year, the amount that was spent on payment for hire vehicles and repairs was 110,000. So just remind you of what the costs are because of our ageing fleet. Councillor Cross.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry to come back on this, but agree there's an urgent need to replace vehicles. A budget figure is an up to figure, as we had adequately explained to us at a previous council meeting. So you don't have to spend the budget allocation. Any figure up to that, the difference will be a saving to the council, which we can spend on other things. Perhaps highway rangers, for instance, would be a good one. So personally speaking, I would prefer us to go for the diesel replacements, to use HVO to get our carbon footprint down. And it means also we can get those replacement vehicles more quickly. So the lead time will be next to zero instead of a year, I would suspect. There'll be no additional on cost with charging infrastructure, and, you know, they're ready to go. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cross. Mr Houghton, can you reply to that, or shall we take another question?
So I think obviously, if members are minded to consider that they'll need an amendment to the motion, to the recommendations, but we're not at that stage at this time.
Councillor Cross, Sharp, sorry.
Just really a question on clarification, really, on process. If we approve this recommendation, does it then go to a higher committee and then on to full council?
No, this is within the gift. It's within the gift of this committee.
It is within the gift of this committee.
So this committee decides matters of this nature, and if this falls under the environment remit, and the budget has already been set by council for the year. So
Okay,
it's within.
all right, thank you.
Councillor Constable.
I tried to read through the report very quickly just now. The cost of putting the electric infrastructure in and the lead time of getting that installed, I didn't see it in the report. Is it in there, or do you have those figures at all, roughly?
So for North, there's already electric charging available down there. So they have some infrastructure in place already. So that's why the cost of for the next report we do need to, but for the North fleet, they would have enough ability to charge the existing fleet.
Councillor Belton.
Thank you. Just some clarity, because I'm almost certain I heard Marcus say that the lead time for diesel vehicles is also about a year, and it certainly is in my experience, 9 months to a year, not next to.
Yes, that's correct. I mean, I wouldn't want to bet my house on that, but certainly, you know, when we placed orders previously, they've been about the same length of time. You know, there's a bit of a flooding of the electric market from sort of China. So if anything, sometimes electric can be quicker than diesel. It just depends on who you speak to on a given day as to what offer you may get and the lead-in times. But they'll all tell you they can do it within 3 months, of course, and then it becomes a year.
I stand corrected, and thank you. I do notice the comparison with diesel. I didn't spot the second appendix, so apologies for that.
Are there any more questions? Thank you.
Before we come to that, flick the mic off a second.
Are we going to move to that?
Yeah, if you flick the mic off.
Having spoken to the officer, I'd like to have a show of hands for diesel and HVO on the premise that of the replacement of the vehicles for motors. Can I have a show of hands on that, please?
Mr. Chairman, wasn't that an amendment put forward to go for diesel, or are we just going to sort of do whichever? But I thought we would vote on an amendment if that was put forward.
Over to you, sir. Matt.
Thank you, Chairman. The report's not been formally moved and seconded yet, so if there's a clear indication that the committee wants to go one way or the other, then that's what the chair will move. So I think he's asking for a show of hands on, say, diesel straight away, and then on electric, and if there's a majority one way or the other, then that's what the chairman will ask the committee to agree in a moment. I hope that makes sense, Chairman.
Thank you. So can I,
Ask for a show of hands.
can I have a show of hands for diesel and HVO, please?
Is that option one, Marcus?
That's appendix 2.
Appendix 2. Appendix 2, yeah.
That's not. Sorry, can I?
Electric vehicles.
If you don't mind, sorry, Chairman, through you, I think it might be easy if Marcus summarises what the two options are, and then we take the show of hands on option 1, which I think is Appendix 1, and then option 2, which is Appendix 2, if that's all right, Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you, members. So Appendix 1 is the purchase of the larger vehicles being diesel, but the 3.5 tonne K-side vehicles being electric. So if that's option 1, we've asked for a show of hands, if I could see a... Oh, sorry, and sorry, in option 2, is Appendix 2, is the purchase of all fleet as diesel only, so there's no electric fleet at all.
Questions from the committee? Councillor Cross? That was voted, sorry. Okay, so...
Voting for option 1.
Option 1. Question from Councillor Belton.
Sorry, just because this is not a usual way to do things. Normally there'd be a full motion and we don't have to, it's a strange way to do things in my opinion. So I would just want to clarify because Councillor Cross mentioned the diesels with HVO, which sounds like a sensible option to me. But does it state in this report in clarity that we would only be using HVO? Because I'm not reading that in Appendix B, and that's where my I don't want to pin myself to an option that I don't fully understand.
Yeah, thank you. If we vote to replace the fleet with diesel vehicles, they can be used with HVO from day one in any percentage we choose. So you can either choose to fuel them with fossil fuel diesel as now, or plant-based biodiesel or HVO diesel, which is the green diesel.
Councillor Mr. Houghton.
So for clarity, I think, although we discuss HVO consideration, tonight you'd be considering whether it's electric fleet or a diesel fleet. Any decision on HVO would have to come back in to the committee, and I'd have to allocate a budget accordingly as well, because it's something that isn't, although I may be able to find the budget, there isn't formally a budget for that doing so. So that there is a risk you could vote on diesel vehicles tonight, you could come back with HVO at a later date, and you decide not to go with HVO. And I think that was always my concern.
Councillor Cross.
Just to point out that there would be a saving if we go to the diesel vehicles. The difference between Appendix 1 and 2 is what's the figure? But you've got a saving there straight away, haven't you? And not the need for the £20,000 to be spent on the charging.
Councillor Belton, did you have a question?
Yeah, sorry, I don't mean to be annoying. So yes, there would be a saving between Appendix A and Appendix B, but if I'm not mistaken, it says there'd be an 84 grand cost of transferring from diesel to HVO. So we're then in deficit if we decide to go down that route, and we've got no electric vehicles, and we're not benefiting from the fact that we've got electric powered vehicles, which tend to come with a fuel cost saving. So I think we're talking about things, but we're not looking at the whole report as a whole. And I think we need to be very careful, because as a committee of only not many of us, 10 of us, we're spending a large sum of money, and I'd like to get it right. As I said, personally, my personal view, I don't mind either way with electric or diesel, but I think we need to make the decision based on the whole picture and not just snippets of it that we're picking out during the debate. So am I reading it right that there could, if we go diesel, there could be an 84 grand cost to change to HVO?
So there's a premium on HVO diesel, and so Councillor Cross is correct that we could just select a proportion, so we could have a lower cost than that. But if you were to move the fleet in its entirety over, it would cost that amount. So there'll be a benefit to be gained from that. However, it's all one fuel tank. So I can't have a few using some HVO and a few using diesel. So you're all in or not in. So there'll be an advantage. I think it's commendable to consider HVO for existing diesel fleets, which I think I've always suggested. But and you could produce a kind of weighty tone if you want to weigh up the entire picture of this. But that's the issue, that with diesel vehicles, you could always go back to diesel rather than. So that's my concern. So in terms of policy, it's far harder to lock down a green diesel policy, whereas electric vehicles, you do lock them down. They're electric vehicles. So
Councillor Belton.
Sorry, this should be my last question, and you may not be able to answer it, but I wonder, do the staff have an opinion on this? Because my staff have a big opinion that they do not want electric vehicles because they make their day more challenging. Admittedly, they do more than 50 miles in a day, but is there a concern that going to electric could cause them any, I know you said operationally they're practical, but does it cost any operational challenges to them? Will it lengthen their day because of charging? Will it all be charged overnight? If we have a power cut, does everyone turn up at work in the morning and can't go anywhere? So I'm just trying to think and cover all angles from a practical point of view.
So, I mean, certainly the fleet manager has had the opportunity to not put forward. So there are electric options on all the fleet, and certainly he made it quite clear not to go down the route for the larger vehicles. So we could consider electric sweeps, and he went no. So this has been based on what they feel is deliverable and what they've used elsewhere. So I looked to the transport manager for Norths to sort of come up with the practical solutions as much as just looking after the fleet.
Just to further add that modern diesel engines, I'm not sure what the Euro categorization is, but they are more efficient than previous old diesel engines in the vehicles that we've got. You know, people imagine diesels as chucking out loads of smoke, but the modern diesel engines are very efficient, and there would be a carbon reduction just by switching to modern diesel vehicles, and even more reduction if you use an ever-increasing percentage of HVO fuels in them as well. Just to make that point. Thank you.
Could I just add to the committee that this 84,000 is the cost of the HVO. We don't know, at least we know what it was last month at 45p per litre, but that doesn't mean to say that it's going to go up or down accordingly. So that's the cost of what that HVO is going to cost us in the future. If we do, and how we mix it, it will be down to Norths to mix that with diesel and HVO as to whether they put 10% in or 20% in, whatever they're buying it in at, and that sort of thing, which will be an extra cost in the way of office work. So there's that to be considered as well, to put it in bluntly. And the new diesels will have to go to, I think there's a condition 6 or category 6 that the diesel has to comply with road safety. And that, as you rightly say, Councillor Cross, that is something which we will get the benefit of from the new diesel engines. Thank you. You have a question, Councillor Cross?
Not really a question, but just my opinion and probably others' opinion. The likely cost curve for HVO diesel is likely to come down because as it's taken up more and more, it's supply and demand scenario, so the price should come down. It's a wholly sustainable fuel in that it's plant derived and not fossil derived. So we're doing our bit for the planet in growing crops for production of HVO. Those crops, when they grow, they take carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and they give off oxygen in the photosynthesis process, I think it is. So, you know, it is doing our bit, but I think the cost is likely to come down over time. So it might be £84,000 or whatever it was if we totally switched now 100% to HVO, but that's not the scenario. We can choose the percentage going forward, and as the price comes down, we can increase that percentage that we use. We don't have to do any conversion to the vehicles. A diesel engine now will run on HVO quite happily. And a lot of people put chip fat in their tanks apparently, and it runs quite well. So I'm told.
I'd also like to mention to the committee that there is a storage of the HVO, which we haven't got at our site at this moment in time. Diesel is very easy to get hold of from most garages, most petrol stations, but we do not have facilities for the HVO, which we would have to consider the cost of putting that in, as we would have to travel some distance to get HVO, unless we have a agreement with a garage that does sell HVO at this moment in time. So over to Councillor I keep calling Mr. Houghton.
That's okay. Thank you, Chair. I think just to come back to Councillor Cross, if I think if HVO was viewed as the solution for then there wouldn't be a push by governments, across Europe generally for the ceasing of production of diesel vehicles by 2035. I mean, also 2030 or 2035. So and the reason being, I think they do not see HVO as a long-term sustainable solution. I think in terms of price, it's a bit of a mystery. So we've obviously followed it for a while. It follows the price of diesel with almost a sort of percentage plus. So I mean, if it became cheaper than diesel, everyone would switch to HVO tomorrow. And so what happens is it always just seems to command a premium above diesel of around about the same amount. So it just follows the diesel price. So bizarrely, it's almost linked to crude oil, a barrel of crude oil in terms of the market. So as that fluctuates, the price of green diesel fluctuates, unfortunately. So, but I think as a long-term solution, it's just not viable. Certainly that's my understanding. It's not the viable solution for say, a countrywide solution.
Councillor Belton.
Just want to, so if we're going to be asked to pick between one or the other, I'm personally comfortable picking diesel. I'm just going to put it out there, but I want to make the point that it's because I believe, based on what I've read and what I've seen, that it's more reliable, it's slightly better cost savings. We may have an option to go greener with it in the future, but we don't have to. But I just want to make it clear, this is not about, for me, it's not just about electric or diesel, it's about the whole bigger picture. And I'm quite comfortable with a diesel fleet when vehicles are doing 50 miles a day. We're not talking about hundreds of thousands of miles a year. We're not talking about huge amounts of emissions. Most of these vehicles are driving slowly in rural areas. They're not the problem when it comes to carbon. So whilst it may not help to our bigger picture of our 2030 target, I do believe it helps towards the reliability of the service and the practicality from the staffing point of view. So I may be out of line stating my background, but that's what I feel is why I would support diesel on this occasion if we are going to vote.
Thank you. Councillor Constable.
Yeah, your comments about the tank, I understood we had our own diesel tank at the depot with the vehicles filled up from. So you would be buying HVO in to put into your own tanks. We wouldn't be looking to buy it at fuel stations. Is that correct, Marcus?
So, I mean, the two papers are quite closely linked, but we're almost, so for Norse, there is a tank on site, so we can have HVO delivered to the site.
Right.
So that, and so, you certainly can't buy in your local sort of petrol station. But yeah, so there shouldn't be an issue with Norse being able to source HVO.
Okay. The other point on HVO, I was reading recently that DHL have switched their whole fleet over to HVO, and also there's a big market in Europe to get rid of waste oil, so you don't necessarily have to grow it in fields where we could obviously be using it to grow food to eat. Big companies produce huge amounts of waste oil throughout Europe, and they're looking for a market to get rid of it. So if they can sell it, they're laughing. So that would obviously long-term bring prices down as well. So there you go.
Thank you.
Can I get the officer to reply to this recommendation? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, at your request, I'll just then take the committee through 2 votes, if that's all right. So we're taking a show of hands because there are 2 options available, so it's helpful before the Chair moves recommendations to have clarity from the committee whether they support Appendix 1, Option 1, or Appendix 2, option 2. The outcome of that, the chair will then formally move for members to vote on with the other recommendations in a moment. So if I could ask for a show of hands for those who support adopting option 1, which is Appendix 1, diesel and electric vehicles.
Sorry, just to clarify, when you say diesel and electric vehicles, there's the 3 RCVs are the diesel vehicles, correct? The rest are electric.
I think that's what the
Thank
officers
you.
are saying.
Right, thank you.
I'm reading from Appendix 1 here, which is on page 10.8 of the report.
Right.
So I'll just ask that again, if that's all right. So all those in support of Appendix 1, option 1, which is diesel and electric vehicles. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4. 4, lovely, thank you. And then those in favour of Appendix 2, which is diesel only. 1, 2, 3, 5. Yeah.
So we go back to our recommendations. R1, to purchase the remaining vehicle fleet as set out in Appendix 2. R2, to instruct Watchford North Limited to arrange for the purchase of the said vehicles. And R3, to approve a one-off additional payment to Rochford North Limited of up to £104,000 to provide hire vehicles if required. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Constable. Thank you. Can I have a show of hands, please? All those in favour? Yes? No? Yeah? One? Is that one? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Yep.
5. Those against? Those abstaining? 3 abstentions.
Agreed.
That's carried. Thank you very much.
Could I just clarify what the result of the vote was, Appendix 1 versus Appendix 2? Because I didn't hear the
Sorry.
the count.
That was 5, 4, and for Appendix 2, and 4 for Appendix 1.
So Appendix 2 was
That's what we voted.
accepted
Yes,
then?
that's what we voted on. Appendix 2.
That was what was just read, yeah.
You didn't clarify that.
He did
I
just-
did.
he
Right,
did just
okay.
read that.
I'll read it again. R1 is to purchase the remaining vehicle fleet as set out in Appendix 2. No, we've changed it, didn't we? We had a vote on it. Appendix 1 or Appendix 2.
You can say it's been agreed, so we'll move to the next slide.
Sorry, I misunderstood. Could we
Okay,
have
thank
that
you.
vote again, please?
It's, if I'm,
Over to the officer. Sorry.
we can't, the item's been disposed of, I'm afraid. The vote's happened, but it's been carried by the committee quite clearly. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.
Next item.
Next item is item 11.
It's not recorded. Names aren't recorded. Yeah.
All right. Okay. As long as everybody's happy. The purpose of item 11, vehicle replacement strategy. The purpose of this report is to set out the vehicle replacement strategy for the replacement of vehicles up to 2029, seeking replacement with equivalent electric vehicles wherever possible, and securing the resources to implement the plan for this administrative year. The report begins on page 11.1. Mr. Houghton, do you have anything to add to this report?
Thank you, Chair. I mean, it's a bit of a similar theme to the previous report, so I imagine we won't have to exhaust the debate too much on the same items, but it's a very similar theme. It's our own fleet rather than the Norse fleet, so our own vehicles need replacing as well. What I felt was helpful, rather than just setting out what needs replacing this year, that we actually set out a bit of a 5-year plan. My intention would be to probably come back every year with a 5-year plan. But to be clear, so that's recommendation 2. Recommendation 2 is very much about the vehicle replacement programme. We're not approving the entire capital scheme for 5 years. All we are doing is saying as a committee that we think that's the right approach, and then that informs the budget setting each year. So it just gives a bit more of a certainty to finance about how we plan ahead our sort of a capital replacement programme for vehicles. But I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Councillor Belton.
Thank you. I don't have anything to debate, and I don't think I have any questions. It's more just to say that I've found this approach really helpful, seeing a 5-year strategy. It gives us a bit of future viewing to see what's going on. And this is where I'm happy to see the electric vehicles being purchased. These are smaller vans, they're less costly, and they're more practical. So I'm in favour, from what I've seen, I'm in favour of it, unless I hear something to the contrary that sways me around the table. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions? Councillor Constable.
Yes, you've not quite clear. You ride on mowers and some of the other vehicles. They're not going to be electric, are they? Are they going to be petrol, diesel, whatever?
I mean, they will be diesel. I mean, and this is where I'm saying HVO has a role to play, regardless. But certainly, no, I won't be buying electric mowers. I mean, the work they do in a day, I'm just not convinced there's anything out there that could cope at this stage.
Councillor Cross, you have a question.
Yes, how have we got to this state of affairs where we've got vehicles over 20 years old that have failed their MOTs? What's happened over the last 20 years is my question. How have we got to this position?
Mr. Houghton, please.
I think in terms, I mean, obviously the budgets are set each year and priorities are given to differing aspects of the authority. In some ways, the committee environment, it gives me an opportunity to set this out a bit more clearly than perhaps I had an opportunity to previously.
If I can just come back, we're a new administration and we're suddenly hit with replacing all these vehicles at great expense to the council, and it's through 20 odd years of neglect that we've got to this stage. And we're looking the bad guys because we're coming up with this huge bill for replacement vehicles right now.
Sorry, if I may, so for clarity, some of it's existing budget, so that some of these were known. And so what I am doing, I'm putting out 5 years worth of planning. So unfortunately, I think if we could address things perhaps earlier last year, then some of these would not be coming forward this year. And so, but it is what it is, unfortunately. But I take your point. But so hence why I wanted this 5-year plan going forward, a rolling 5-year that I think that members can ask me to present every year. And I think then we're all cited of where we are. Thank you.
Councillor Belton.
Thank you, Chairman. I would just like to remind Councillor Cross, he's been in administration for 18 months. So last year, this could have come forward. You've been chairman, I believe, of what was the portfolio as lead member, and you didn't feel the need to bring it forward last year. So it's come forward at a time that the current administration that Councillor Cross has been a part of for 18 months feels appropriate, and have very helpfully set out a 5-year plan to ensure that we can budget accordingly. And that, as Marcus has ably pointed out, these are budgeted for vehicles. And I don't think anyone looks the bad guy by improving our assets, by creating new fleet. We're here to look after budgets and create and deliver a service. So I certainly won't be calling anyone a bad guy for purchasing new fleets, but I would like to remind Councillor Cross that he's not a new administration. He's been in it for 18 months. Thank you.
Well, thanks for the reminder, Councillor Belton, but I think we're seeing here an example of 20, 25 years of neglect, some of which was possibly, a non-conservative administration. But
Can we just put the comments through the chair, please, and not to each other? Thank you. I will say that, yes, I have been chair of this for over a year, and I put myself in to try and get more out of our fleet for the amount of money we had spent in this past year. I thought that the fleet was able to carry on for another year, and it will take approximately 9 months to 10 months to get this fleet back into operation. So in actual fact, we are running this fleet 22 years and not 20 years. And I do say that if you was to look at some of the equipment, it's beyond its age. I had a car for 16 years, and that become inevitable that it had to go. So, and that's the reason why we got to this stage, is that the vehicles are really now beyond their life, and have been so for some time. But we've managed, what we had to do was manage the fleet as a new interim council, and we had to manage that for the first year, and this is where we are now for our second year, and hopefully this will carry on. We will replace the fleet when it is necessary to replace, and not have this problem again. Thank you. So I move to the recommendations set out on page. Oh. Sorry, Councillor Constable.
Right. When you talk about Councillor Cross was sort of criticising the previous administration for the vehicles and why they've got into that condition, don't forget we've also had a couple of years of COVID. And also, if you buy a good quality vehicle, you're expected to last. I've just recently sold an 18-year-old van that was still in good condition. So if you're buying vehicles that are a little bit dearer than normal, I think you'll get better value for money out of them. So if you buy a cheap French van, it ain't going to last. If you buy a Mercedes van, you will pay more money, but you will get 3 times the value out of it. So I would commend to Marcus that he looks at other makes of vehicles, and maybe some of the vehicles that may be of a better quality, so that we get a good lifetime out of them. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment, Councillor Constable. Unfortunately, the budget is the budget, and we do not have any more, we don't do the lottery to get any more money to go towards that budget. So unfortunately, we have to do what we have to do with the budget that is set. Thank you. Committee, due to the fact that we had Appendix 1 and 2 that we looked at on the previous item 10, is everybody happy for me to move to this report again as set out, or do we need to clarify what we're dealing with? Thank you. I'll move to the officer to explain. Thank you.
Sorry, yes, thank you, Chairman. I think what the Chairman was conveying was that on the last report, there were 2 options available. The committee was clearly split in terms of what it wanted, and I think the Chairman's saying he's not heard a great deal of disagreement on this report, so he's asking the committee, are they happy to move directly to the recommendations as written? And if they are, then that's what he will move in a moment.
Councillor Cross?
Thank you, Chair. I don't see an appendix 2 for diesel options here. So this recommendation is to approve the purchase of Toyota Prius electric vehicles, Ford Transit electric vehicles, yeah? No diesel option?
Over to Mr Houghton.
Sorry, I think in hindsight, I'll try and make them perhaps slightly different fonts or something, because they are quite confusing to separate, aren't they? So if you go to 11.11, then that's where Appendix 2 starts.
Yeah.
Vehicle replacement plan with diesel-only vehicles. So I do apologise. If I'll make a note in future that I'll make them a sort of slightly different style, because you can flip from one to the other without even realising. Thank you.
I beg your pardon, I didn't see that appendix again.
Can I just pass this over to Officer, please? Thank you.
Thank you, committee. So on behalf of the chairman, so just for clarity, the appendix or the option that's recommended within the report, in the recommendations of the report, is set out at page 11.8. The other option, option 2, appendix 2, begins at 11.1, which Marcus has just pointed out. What the chairman's saying is that he doesn't see from the committee a great deal of disagreement, and that members haven't seemed to speak against option 1, appendix 1. So with that, the chairman will move the recommendations as set out on page 11.1 of the report. He'll move them on block rather than read them out. They are as set out in the paper. The chairman moves them and invites a seconder.
Councillor Wilson, thank you.
And then you just want to say
Show of hands.
for against
Yeah.
or abstain.
Can I have a show of hands, please, for?
That's unanimous, Chairman.
Thank you. Any against? No?
That was unanimous.
That was unanimous. Thank you very much, Councillor. Okay, so that concludes our business for this evening. Do I have any questions before we shut? Councillor Constable.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As this is a new committee and it's a new system, are the committee allowed to put suggestions forward for items to be brought up at the next committee meeting and items to be considered?
Yeah, absolutely.
Conversation with you on the business.
Sorry,
I'll hand this over to our officer. Yeah.
So there's not an agenda item tonight to do so, but certainly, I mean, if you wish to speak to the chair or myself about items to consider, then we'll discuss that and consider putting them forward to the agenda next time.
That's right, because I was only going on one of the other committees where they have a future work plan, and I think it would be useful for committee members if there was something like that as an item on the committee, so that we can bring things forward to the committee that we think would be useful for the council going forward. So I'm happy to sort of put my ideas out there now, unless you want them formally in writing.
So I'm happy. So we do have a work plan. I'm happy to circulate that round to members, and I think where we're hoping to have more informal meetings, working almost like a working group of the committee, that would come to that as well for discussion. But certainly more than happy to circulate that around to committee members what the work plan that we have. Just haven't formalised it into a report. It's still finding our feet a little bit on how best to use the committee system.
Thank you, Councillor. And so I end this meeting at 9:10. Thank you very much for attending.